Things are heating up in JFAC as members consider several million-dollar budget decisions dealing with everything from healthcare to education. Though conservatives are winning on some key issues that affect the future of our state and society, we are losing ground on Idaho's top dollar issues. Conservatives are able to cut large portions of the public health budget to reduce debt and the negative impact of new social handouts. However, the Medicaid budget has reached record levels of spending, and colleges continue to receive funding for woke departments and positions. Conservatives started the week on a positive note, with wins in the second half of the budget for the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. The Division of Public Health was among the biggest wins for conservatives this week. The budget passed out of the Joint Finance Appropriations Committee with a party-line vote to cut more than $30 million in federal funding for things like advancing health equity, providing taxpayer-subsidized immunizations to Ukrainian refugees, promoting and distributing the COVID-19 vaccine, and general COVID prevention grants to essentially anyone who wants them. This budget also cuts advertising funding sourced from the Millennium Fund that has been used to direct more than $140,000 to LGBTQ events and groups under the cover of sponsorship for tobacco cessation. The Department of Health and Welfare was under fire last summer for sponsoring the Boise Pride in the Park event, where a children's drag show was scheduled but ultimately canceled due to public outcry. The budget also works to remove funding for sex education curricula, which IFF has previously reported on for teaching convoluted versions of abstinence education that essentially says that sexual activity is okay as long as you can keep from getting pregnant or contracting an STD. They also teach that watching porn is normal and okay. These concepts harm children and set them up for unhealthy relationships and lifestyles later in life. A final win for conservatives this week is actually found in the budget for substance abuse treatment and prevention. Everyone knows about the opioid crisis and how it negatively impacts our state. To address this, the agency requested $8 million as a supplemental appropriation of so-called state opioid response grants. These grants would be in addition to $11.2 million already dedicated to the program. However, these funds are actually being used to support ironically named harm reduction projects. These projects give free needles, condoms, and naloxone to drug users. The Idaho Harm Reduction Project, a private group that received nearly $500,000 from IDHW last fiscal year, works to, quote, honor the experience of sex workers and provide needles for transgender people to inject hormones. However, you won't find any of this information on their website any longer, as these pages were taken down in the last week to cover up these clearly objectionable activities. The new budget will redirect these funds from this California-style program to first responders instead. There weren't all wins in the Department of Health and Welfare this week, as the Division of Medicaid has reached new heights with a staggering $4.7 billion budget. The Medicaid budget is the epitome of big government. For perspective on just how much money we're talking about, if you were to stack the dollar bills used to cover this budget, it would be 382 miles tall. This is slightly longer than the distance to drive down the US 95 from Coeur d'Alene to Boise. All session, the IDHW estimated that there are about 150,000 people on the Medicaid rolls that may not be eligible. Yet the budget is still expected to grow by 16% compared to last year. Conservatives reasoned that if only half of these people were removed from the rolls, they could cut the budget by $840 million. This was a very generous estimate. However, the committee voted to kill this proposal, granting the governor's recommendation with the dissent of a core group of conservative legislators. After asking for data procured by the department, IFF learned that the IDHW only plans to remove about 17,000 ineligible people from the rolls by the time the unwinding process concludes. This is unbelievable, since the department has not been allowed to remove ineligible people from the rolls since the start of the pandemic due to federal rules. The final loss for conservatives this week is the perennial issue of wokeism in Idaho's colleges and universities. College presidents spent the duration of their presentations before JFAC this year with the usual gaslighting about existence of social justice initiatives. President Marlene Tromp of Boise State University and her counterparts even said that the diversity, equity, and inclusion positions at their institutions were intended to address the needs of, quote, rural students. But this doesn't make sense when they're hiring staff for gender equity centers, LGBTQ offices, women's centers, and African American cultural centers. Senator Scott Herndon sought to cut $4.8 million and the 56 full-time positions used for diversity, equity, and inclusion at these institutions. However, only 6 Republicans supported the decision, instead deciding to accept the language to bar the use of state-appropriated funds for DEI and social justice. This is still problematic as it ignores the remaining 60% of non-appropriated funds within the university system that are still public funds. In sum, we see that conservatives won on many social programs that have severe long-term impacts on our state, but still lost ground on some key areas. The magnitude of government bureaucracies like the Medicaid system or wokeism in colleges and universities symbolizes the entrenchment of federal programs and leftist ideologies in our great state. Though wins like those seen in the public health budget are very important to curb these destructive policies, conservatives must work to chip away at the bigger picture. The future prosperity of Idaho and America depend on it. For more episodes of Fiscal Fridays, bill ratings, and articles, please visit idahofreedom.org.